IT guy's desk. The filthy...
The deciduous mon.
The office of esteemed estate agents, high-rolling lino merchants and solicitors Rayburn, Christie, Clark and Walloper. Top floor, big open plan office. Massive ball pit outside through the sliding glass doors. Light streaming in through the grimy seagull shit-flecked windows. A great view across the harbor. Boats, and in the distance slowly spinning wind turbines. The slightest waft of tangy wreckage wafting from the office of Walloper Sr. The usual for the AM half-eaten long pig 2 sandwiches littering the IT guy's desk, the filthy whore. Desk chat, how's your morning been so far? Says the office man. This happened every day, almost like a ritual. You could set your watch by it. Sometimes before the wee Walloper's first pickup or delivery. He's phoned 3 times already today. Something about a muck spreader getting the car dirty. People not being able to see the logo on the car, not knowing who he was as he made his entrance. So I told him to take the back road. He had to park up for a think about that. Then he phones back, typical. The back roads are muddy, they are farm tracks, he's concerned, reported the officewoman. Tired, and annoyed that she had to handle the boss's son, when, in fact all he was a glorified courier driver. It was such a drain, and it would seem that 3 months into the job that this was the job. She was fizzing. The man pivots his hips. Strong interpersonal relationships with a dot of well-being training. Just showing enough interest. That's worse than the cleaner. We all have to endure these type of trials though. His car floats, he kens that right. Well, you would think. Fucking Walloper. If he wasn't the boss's son, I would tell him to stick his concerns up his back arse. Did I tell you that time I went for a piss and the cleaner had left the door unlocked and he was in there wiping his arse? It nearly put me in a diabetic coma and even the phone jangled. It was him again. It cut to the wall screen. Black, no video, just booming audio. Rural noises and cracking knuckles. The car idling and absent-mindedly reformatting its hard drive. Bloody jipe, the woman muttered just before hitting connect. Walloper Jr., wee Walloper. The car jolted him awake. Oh, not again, he thought. Fit now. His eyes took a while to focus. Heavy rain, sheep in a field. Something had caused the car to stop. Something that he knew he would not be comfortable with. He asked the car what parameters it had registered. Rain. Nay bothered. Dubs on the road, nay bothered. Sheep, nay bothered. CATTLEGRID. I'm nay bothered, but the occupant, that's you min, will be. Concern registered. He still couldn't see for the drizzle. I'm not getting out in this, he thought, becoming very concerned. It wasn't normal rain, it was vicious sideways rain. A cattle grid. That's all he needed. He had already freaked out at the amount of traffic and in particular a dangerous low-flying agricultural vehicle that had prompted him to take this silly alternate route. Putting him way behind schedule on his second errand of the day already. He looked at his word tablet. 12.30. Bestiality diorama. It was 11.45 already. When would he have lunch? He didn't like this. He growled. Cracked his knuckles. Oh me, oh my. He would have to phone now, not the office this time. They were in a bit of a mood today. Concerns. He didn't like phoning. They wouldn't be able to see him as he'd put tape over the lens. This was all going off the usual procedure. Car. Wipe the windows, I cannae see the cattle grid. The car duly did as it was asked. With a sigh it stopped floating and gently sat itself in the dubs. This could take a while. Later, almost an hour later, he phones again to make sure he's heading for the right entrance. A chirpy woman answers the phone and bellows the following. HIYAH BAMS. ABZCREM here. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, nay fucking fuss. What you want though? He shuddered. composed himself and announced, "I'll be expecting Lino, I am from Rayburn, Christie, Clark and Walloper," and even though they couldn't see him on the call he sucked in his cheeks and angled his head for a more regal and lofty look. Magnificent. Son of the Mans. A few seconds of hissing, crackles a strange cluster of tones. Like metal clattering. Then IDINNAE ken about carpets, but if ye're here to pick up that rattling box oh shite ye're fine. See ye finna see ye min. Ask for Shona. I'm big boned ye canna miss mare HAAAAARRRRGHHH clack. The connection was cut off. He was very concerned. Best wait a while. The car turned itself off. Here we go again, it sang, sinking into the dubs. On wreckage, let's go. Lockdown. I'm rereading my lockdown diary, a jotter, handwritten. Block caps like I'm shouting on that day, June the 3rd, raking through jotters, sheafs and packages of A4 tied up with binder twine pulled up from the flooded close, no doubt, afore the hydro disaster. In lockdown, no fags until I speared that massive bale of tobacco. I had to make do with manky pebbles from the side of the river. Beachy bit to beachy bit looking for a nice stone, right size, and smooth, also nobody wants a rough mouth. Checking on Mr. Cribbage once a day, sometimes twice. Bones rattling back. All is well. So where to start? Cribbage. He's the one that landed me in this splendid isolation. Splendid apart from the gull, and occasional visits from that cosplay dolt. It started with work, as part of my half-assed fieldwork towards my dissertation. And a condition of the massive amount of money I had tricked out of Aberdeen City Council. All I really had to do was to just write something using the materials stored in the city and university archives written by King James V. That's all first had to do. The only condition of the bulbous cultural bandwidth allocator Robert Leverett III, who informed me he didn't even want to read it, the deal would be I would write a tome. They would print 500 and leave them lying around Aberdeen or throw them at visiting officials from other jealous councils. His words exactly, well, without his constant swearing. He was adamant that the book would be printed in hardback for decent throwing weight, right off the head of that baldy fucker Faye Dundee, he said. It was a daft amount of money, and turns out it would double as my dissertation. It didn't to begin with. But I think Leverett shouted at some people from the university, and probably threatened to send his pretend Doric pet poet Ollie down to set about them verse and erse wise. Which is enough to put the fear of God into anyone. So it was too good to turn down. It was dull work. I'd warmed to the dead king reading his rant against smoking, but the actual real copies were kept in Edinburgh, so that was no use. I'd not actually left my flat yet though. No point when I could search remotely through the cloud on various rectangles in my house. The only stuff that really interested me was the witchcraft stuff, and witch trial stuff. There was a lot of that held in Aberdeen written by James, and vast amounts of extra material from other primary and secondary sources to bulk out my waffle. I pulled up various scans, just checking really to see what the material was like. I was getting them for nothing thanks to council clearance, so I got greedy and pretty much loaded up with everything that they had. A mighty 2 terabytes. I'd use that, I thought, for a while, get a feel for things before taking a trip to actually dig through old papers and arguing with whatever pillock was acting as a gatekeeper to a pile of mouldering old words. And there, constantly, in King James writing the same phrase, or name. I couldn't be sure. It was fascinating me, so I hit up Find on the gun-metal grey abs cloud on my rectangle, mirroring it on the big rectangle that stood in for a real window in my living room. Pish flaps, no, it was definitely a name, although it sounded slightly like a shopping list of a deranged mentalist. Pan socks jot fags. And bang, there it was, halfway down the search results. A group, some sort of mindlessness, exercise group, blurry videos, pictures, various posts on social and anti-social media. A picture of a card pinned to a notice board in a shop. A phone number and email, blurry but readable. Now, this was more like it. The rest of the search results were familiar to me. I had most of the links, articles and files bookmarked. This could be a great angle, or at least a bit of fun. I clicked on a few links. There were to reoccurring people. A woman with red hair who looked kind of familiar, but she didn't seem to photograph well, either blurry or pixelated, possibly on purpose, and a man who seemed to be constantly banging on about the despair code. And rumors of rural rituals. Particularly, when I eventually got hold of his fantastically unrestrained blog, the much whispered about gassing of the guff seemed to be his main interest. I decided that I had to hang with this bunch, the Shriekers of ABZ. But like some sort of Freemasonry club or trying to join a space metal band, I would need a credible introduction. Some way in, they looked like a jumpy bunch, and quite sweaty too. I had loads of notes, countless dry and academic journal articles and citations, but nothing of real interest. I had found some links between the networks of Shriekers and James' blasted paranoid writings, as well as the mysterious repeated mention of this Pan-Sox-Jot Fags entity. One route favored by gangs of nocturnal tight Ra-clad Shriekers almost exactly followed the route of witch trial processions described by the good king in his letters. I was seeing connections, but I was wary of joining dots to suit what I wanted to see. I was a bloody historian, or a historian in training anyway, a body. Or simply a muck-raking journalist of the lowest character. Some of the stuff I was picking up about the covert exercise group was making me assume they were a real bunch of perverts. Academics, a strange bunch. That's where I ran into Mr. Cribbage, gatekeeper to the written materials of King Jim. I mean, he was an odd guy, but compared to that exercise group he was refreshingly normal. So it worked out odd, really nothing left, just a pair of eyeballs in a moldy skull. The cabin, off-grid. A self-contained network. Hydropower. I was intrigued. It was a cool house, well, it was more of a semi-permanent jalopy. And absolutely worse than his office. Boxes of files everywhere, bookshelves jam-packed with jotters, box files and ring binders. He had a huge collection of Aberdonian punk rock material, mostly tapes, and some records, also about 50 or so reel-to-reel tapes of multi-track sessions. Some of these I had vaguely heard of. I did ask about them, as we made our way inside, as the midges began to bite despite the weed smoke. Blastcap's stuff, I've got all his notes as well. I have no idea where they are. Maybe downstairs, that's all he said. I made a note. Might be worth looking into later, if I had time. Later. Funny. Later, time would be all I had. Locked down. Anyway. Later on that night, as the lamps burned low and the fire settled into a muted glow in the hearth, I remarked upon his great change in appearance since my last visit. Perchance he would have knowledge of the sacred dance of cross-platform content delivery, the massive fanny. He uncoiled himself, gangling weathered limbs cracking, holding my gaze for what seemed like an age, pulled a long drag from his pipe and explained it thus: I'm deciduous. This is the price I pay for my constant renewal in the spring. I suffer this every winter. And you are perhaps the first person this decade that has been privy to my pain and my secret. A gentle hail of skin drowsed the table as he spoke. An avalanche of rotting amber dandruff. I realized that he had for some reason allowed me to see this process. Allowed, or simply craved someone else to bear witness. Whether it was real or not remained to be seen. I didn't feel privileged, to say the least. This was something that the man could have kept to himself. There was no reason for me to know this. Perhaps. I could imagine that somehow I had been lured out here in the middle of nowhere with a deluded and possibly dangerous lunatic. Fair enough, a mentalist with some sort of wasting disease. He was rotting before my eyes. His pipe huffed deftly. Coils of heavy smoke arced from his lips and nose. It seemed at the time there was some evidence of smoke emerging from his ears as well, but this may have been a flight of fancy on my part. My phone buzzed on the table. I have to take this call, I said, scooping up the plastic yap box. Farts moan, recognizing the number flashing on its concealed display panel. I picked up my semi-drained glass of single malt and retreated to the kitchen. Hi Alan, where exactly are you? I've been ringing you for the last half hour min. Been round your flat as well, like, are you down the tune or Samat? NA, last minute thing, I'm out the road. Something came up, will you cover for me at the meeting? It's mostly your words anyhow, I dinna really feel right about presenting it anyhow, I okay. Look, this is a bit short notice, but I reckon I'll manage. If I was a ponce I'd call this highly irregular, your Anne. Alan chuckled dryly into the phone. Clattering in the background, street sounds. Cheers min, I reckon I'll be back in town tomorrow. I'll give you a shout in the afternoon, maybe hit the bells or the Prince, weather permitting. Tidy, it's a date, you AIDS-ridden whore. I clicked the phone off. He seemed okay about it. This was pretty standard for Alan. I knew that panic would kick in several minutes before he made his way to the podium to begin his presentation, and it would probably be downhill all the way from there. My role was usually to try and keep the guy calm. He was talented and once relaxed was a convincing and engaging speaker, keen to get his ideas across and not afraid of meandering off the main track to illuminate his points in a way that laymen could relate to. And lay women as well, obviously, but that was Alan's true calling. But that tale is too lengthy to relate here. Anyhow, that was not what troubled me now. I refilled my glass from the best of the clutter of bottles lurking in the kitchen. I snuck a look at Mr. Cribbage in the lounge. He was absent-mindedly peeling and hacking at his calloused hands. Curious. Very curious. Mr. Cribbage, as it turned out, was the coordinator of the university's collection of King James surviving written material. I began to find myself locked in conversation with the man during my breaks from searching the archives. He was, when I first met him, a classic academic, tweed and corduroy and a permanent quizzical squint. I gathered very quickly that he was a drug addict. After a few chats over coffee and cigarettes, our relationship became more hedonistic and convivial as one morning, after pulling an all-nighter poring over scabby low-grade PDF files and microfilm, Mr. Cribbage asked me for a smoke, and I accidentally furnished him with a joint instead of a roll-up. I saw no point in concealing the deed. The herb rolfed around us. Students tore past at top speed, desperately thrashing out their gibberish youngster talk, simultaneously enticing and disgusting. It was homegrown. From a friend I had for a while toyed with the idea of getting some clippings and growing some myself, was put off by the technicality and palaver of buying and setting up the requisite lights, and the whole idea of hydroponics filled me with dread. As far as I was concerned, the entire concept of hydroponics lay within the dubious realm of science fiction. And really that's where it should stay. He assured me that I need not worry. His stint as an experimental alchemist had produced some startling discoveries. Originally he had amused himself pursuing the age-old quest of turning various base metals into gold. Purely for profit, this had been stalled somewhat when the supply of lead at his local scrapyard had become scarce. He did for a time indulge in freelance raiding of houses and outbuildings in his local area, but this proved dangerous and risky business. Twice he had been cautioned by Grampian police's finest for scaling decrepit outhouses. Luckily his quick wits deflected the officer's line of inquiry. Amazing what a surreptitious dousing of alcohol to the head and mouth will do to convince someone that one's true nature was not burglar but piss-head climbing enthusiast. And of course the rabidly fake French accent also helped. "I think you've had too much to drink, sir. Why don't you allow us to escort you to an alcohol assessment center where you can scrutinize the nature of your need to imbibe such large quantities of alcohol? Yes. I would very much like to how you say unaccompany you, but this air building shall bend to my climbing skill. I must prove my metals." One officer grins, not even attempting to conceal his thoughts behind a politely raised hand over mouth. "He's N of those Frenchy climbing nuts. Ken like them folk that charge about jumping off of buildings and that. Accompanying officer snorts in agreement. He's a bit old for that, ain't he? Ark, well, you live and learn. After roughly the same scenario occurred twice in 1 week, Mr. Cribbage decided that this ad hoc raiding and procurement was far too dangerous, and his alchemy took on a new twist. He tried new substances, astounded at his experimental audacity and inventiveness: Tetra Paks, discarded televisions, couches, a wheelie bin. A seagull, stunned with a length of wood. Before finally striking it lucky and hitting upon a combination that produced startling results. It turned out that a quantity of discarded lager bottles, the right mixture of brands and levels of dregs contained within was essential, and siphoned fresh piss from the portable urination pyramids that were dotted round the central streets of Aberdeen of a Friday, Saturday and Sunday night for the relief of revelers, produces a fantastic substance that he dubbed wreckage. Interestingly, for a man in his condition, this wreckage was far more valuable than his initial goal of producing gold. What he was going to do with large ingots of gold anyway was something he had not really thought through. In a moment of rare sensibility, he concluded that the best way to handle any gold that he produced was to boldly produce a nugget of the valuable metal in lieu of cash at the local spa. He always found the drones of the Kingdom of Spa to be particularly susceptible to reasoned and forceful lunacy. But no matter. He had found something far better than gold. His crabby journals recorded the experimentation with his newly forged wreckage. He handed me 2 of them, detailing the most pertinent facts relating to his study. Meeting a scabby junkie on the street one night out gathering piss and bottles, he had somehow cajoled the human heroine Hoover into the back of a taxi and back to his sprawling period townhouse in Old Aberdeen. How he managed this is beyond me. How he managed to regularly convince taxi drivers to transport empty bottles and containers of piss was also equally unfathomable to me. He, did it has to be said, have a sort of disarming muddled charm that made folk think the better of him. He seemed to broadcast a befuddled stand-down order to all that came within his range. People took him as odd, but not a threat, and as a consequence he could go about his business without remark or rebuke. And that he did. Mr. Cribbage had retired to the warm glow of the fire, pulling a chair close to the hearth, humming lightly to himself. Read them, they will tell you more than my dim recollections will, and after you have read them we shall talk some more. You will no doubt have questions to put to me on what you find in those notebooks. I examined the first of the 2 ramshackle volumes. The scribbling of the lunatic was not unknown to me. On certain investigations in the past I had looked into what on the surface at any rate appeared to be genuine happenings, but they eventually turned out to be the spiraling intertwined threads of mania and mental illness. I was getting so good at spotting these folk that I began to think that I could identify a crank with just a cursory inspection of the subject's handwriting, from the neat and almost decorative script of Mr. Cribbage. I caught no whiff of insanity. And for that matter I caught no hint of a sense of humor either. Here was a man that had been shaped by the terse discipline of academia. His prose was stilted, lumpen, overly detailed, ponderous and jaw-droppingly dull. The facts that he related in those hastily assembled word bundles were once examined anything but dull. His rabid theories on hydroponic growth of human organs veered off into the realms of far-fetched fantasy. The margins of the documents were infested with surreal cryptic doodles, genitals twisted and distorted, mutilated and reconstructed body forms. Strange constructions that could have been buildings on some new world or microcellular globules and nuclear. He was fucking eccentric, that was for sure. Somewhere along the line he related his condition. It first came to light in the summer of his 27th year. He lamented his fate in this year, having reached the age of the rock star death. Like Hendrix, Morrison and Cobain, he imagined his corpse and legacy intertwined like a Gustav Klimt picture, except without all that fucking stupid gold paint. It was so cheap and garish looking. Death lurked, his skull tarnished a putrid purple. And the opiates, he could devour them. Later on, we could talk no more. With an almighty clatter in the cabin, he fell to bits, bones everywhere. His skull slowly rolled towards me, coming to a halt facing my feet. Between the teeth there was a neatly folded bit of paper. I reached down, pulled the paper out, along with all his teeth, rattling the wooden floorboards. Unfolding it, the message was clearly in the handwriting of cribbage, now in bits all over the shop. It read simply. As I began to read, I noticed a perfect circle of dust around me on the floor. Dustification. I knew all about that. I had extensively researched the work of Dr. Judy Wood, and met her once, a fascinating woman. But the disintegration of cribbage was most definitely, in my opinion, not the work of a directed energy weapon. This was something else. It read simply, HIMMIN. Gather me up and stick me in the overwinter box. There's exactly 345 bones in me, didn't I miss any? If you do try and concentrate on getting the important bits, I can get replacements smelted on the other side of winter. All the best. 4X. P.S. Don't leave the cabin, till at least January. Notes on this on Notebook 3, pp 180 pp 256 IBIDY BIDY IBIDDY ABODDY. The cosplay dolt, pylons over the river, he got a fizzing jolt, one pish. Necro chamber potty mouth. To everybody. Thinks it's just a joke name, but it really is Long Pig C. Calvin's investigation into the limbs in the lock. 3. Leverett, Robert, C3. Cunts on a boat, the narwhal salute visitors from Mockland. Rusty chainmail. Not chainmail. He's wearing the alien implant jacket. It looks a bit like chainmail until given closer inspection. Cosplay Pillock in the river. Why would you do that? He came under the jam jar shield though. The water is stinking up the river against the current. Fortunately the river is left-handed. Giant HOGWEED. Visitors from Mockland. Rusty armor. Hell of a hike up the Don. Blue algae clogging him up, and a few dead dogs as well. Nasty stuff that. Now what the heck, you massive waterlogged jipe. Visitor from Mockland. I'm loath to insert further pictures. All this cut and paste stuff is getting really messy. And this taking photos of ideas is a pain. I can't find the original scribbles. Some are inserted into his diabetes diary, others on loose bits of paper. I think I should stick to TextMin. That day I ventured out, down to the little river, walking briskly, trying to avoid that nosy gull. Axe in hand just in case. Steve, as I like to call him, was a real pain in the neck, always sticking his beak into my business. I was wary of his ability if he spotted me to put me into a right muddle of a dwam. It had happened countless times. I'd wandered too close to the barrier. I now know from reading Cribbage's lengthy account of Borkin Gliss and his intergalactic pogroms and escapades that this fizzing corduroy-shaded barrier was the infamous jam jar shield, so I had to stay sharp. That day he hit me with a dose of dwam and I came to with my belt buckles on my breeks securely attached to a quite high-up kitchen cupboard. Not the way I normally like to hang, min. Fucking gull. Creepy, two different colored eyes, never ever seen the like. I only really ventured to the river for little stones before the bale of rolling tobacco had arrived. I found sucking on a pebble helped with the urge to smoke, but now since they were in season, and since the little burn was left-handed, they grew on the right side. Mighty hogweeds. I would hack at him, avoiding the burning sap, and fill a jar full of sap to tip the spear for the spearing. The knight, damp and rusty, carries the infamous sword of Bobby the Golic Smasher. He must be a designated boy, or had at some point sat upon the remote viewing Bleason throne. I was getting a little too much insight into the workings of Cribbage's mind, and I had stuff to do. Tasks, chores and needs must. First, even in this weather, an outside shite. Then from the porch, speared not asked, just stabbed and reeled in, something to eat beyond the fizzing jam jar field. Crackly and annoying the energy that keeps me within this, what? Very small area of land. For fucking months min. I just need to stay the course, bide my time and wait for spring to sprung. Get sprung. An evergreen boner. I grab the last notebook, and slowly tread the steps up from the basement of the cabin. The floor stinks. Damp clay, I stamp my boots as I lump up the steps. Dollops of grey earth splattering of my green much repaired boots. Too many repairs on that pair, the soles were fucked, all worn on the same side of the right-hand boot. Always putting my best back of heel forward. Every time. Holes all patched, sometimes twice or more. This winter was dragging on a lot, like I'd been here for ages, getting frayed around the edges. Upstairs. Ground level. Mid-morning light. Union Square though, even up here, as the light farted through the curtains and lit up the absolute kern of the cabin, Union Square. Such a strange place. Fuck knows why, about half an hour after arriving at the cabin I discovered there was no shitter. Cribbage had told me take it outside to the outhouse which had long since vanished. Not strictly true like. It was still there, obscured and hazy behind the fizzing haze. Maybe what 20 meters out, if you stood on the decking, fag in hand, at sunset squinting, maybe then yeah, that off-white shimmering rectangle could maybe be an outside shitter. Or whatever. The plans said it was there. I may even have walked past it on my way in here. But fuck, that might as well have been 3 night shifts and an embroidery day release course away. What's what the now? What's occurring? What developments? The basics. I heave my manure. Shitting down over the edge of the decking. It plops into the bowl of the trebuchet. I pause, fart, then finally dump a skittery blob. Startling the rabbits in the scree. I waft my arse, then wipe with some grass and leaves from the pile, that gets chucked also into the metal dish below. I'll launch it later. After lunch, if I catch any. Cribbage, believe it or not, still worked the fax machine. It wasn't really a fax machine, slightly more sophisticated than that. But essentially all his communication went through that machine. It may well have been video, audio or text or pictures, but that thing, and it was a thing, printed everything out and dumped it into a massive out tray. Greedy thing ate reams of A4 daily. Another chore. The other day it printed out a video. Frame by frame. 6 reams of paper. I just fucking boxed and labeled it all. Not a fucking clue what was on the film. It was somewhere in Aberdeen though. I recognized the big U of Union Square. But, so much red. So much blood. But then, I had fuck all else to do, but the chores and the reading. During the afternoons I'd wander upstairs up through the upper rooms, opening the concealed stairs to the roof space, stopping to light a fag. Then up to the observatory, which was more like a roof shed. The roof was concave, covered in slippery slates, so I would just sit there in the roof shed, scribbling my scribbles. It was a shared space. Sleeping Cribbage was here as everywhere in the cabin. Up here piled up was his recording equipment. A guitar, some cables. And also of course hanging from the rafters a pair of headphones. Connected to nothing. The light up here was brilliant in the afternoon. I would open the doors to the octagonal room, but never ventured onto the roof. Just let the air in, wafting round my badly hand-washed pairs of pants and socks on the moldy old high dry. I would never run out of fags. A fucking shrink-wrapped bale of amber leaf downstairs had arrived on the second day by Mystic Hyab. Some boy, Cribbage. Looked after his own. I'd give him that. But I, from there, like a shitty observatory I could see for miles. But only as far as the edges of the jam jar. Nay, way past that thing. Always there, making and enforcing boundaries. Slamming down and shutting down everything. Except the stream. It ran on. The burn that carried the visitor from mock land. Shite shitted. I sit for a bit. I smoke, listen to the birds chirping. Cribbage back there, rattling in bits in his box, would no doubt chunter and disapprove. Dead time is dead. Make use of it, Min. Read, learn. His jotter full of mad shit laying at my side. Again I flick through it. Latter pages. More incoherent. Biro, crossouts, taped in sections from the fax machine. I'm tightening the mechanism on the spear. Not spearing as in asking, but a weapon. I see an old school link. Audio. Box 13 tape 6 precise notes, scribbled over and highlighted. Afternoon caperage maybe. I trundle off, down the steps, and look at the trees I've pulled in from the ether. Limbs twisted and bent, buckled by the skittery haze ore there. If it moves. Spear at it, he said, and a few times a day I hit something orange binder twine swishing behind the killing point. And, if I'm lucky, a solid thump, and a roar of pain. Wind the fucker in. Back to the pit. Then gut it, whatever it is. Count the legs and heads. Sometimes tentacles. The other day I dragged back after much cycling on the static bike.
What's the oddies? Jing ding 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 jing ding 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 jing ding 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 jing ding ding dong jing ding 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 jing ding 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 jing ding 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 jing ding ding dong jing ding 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 jing ding 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 jing ding.
The other day I dragged back after much cycling on the static bike a huge hairy oblong. Thick skin, but cooked up fine. Tasted much like a mock chop from the finest chipper in Dufftown. Size of a wardrobe it was. Weeks worth of eating. I make firewood for the rest of the morning. Axe handy. Long lengths into short. Splitting 'em down. A single drowsy wood wasp is all the life I see. Afore I make lunch I check on him. Like a parent checking on a sleeping toddler. Knuckles chap on the top of the box. Bones rattle. Okay, he's fine. I wonder if he dreams. His bones shake. Is that all? I'll ask him when he pops out later. Waiting. Stop moving the scenery. That's the problem. How did Cribbage's YouTube channel post? It went dark. Deleted. Suspended. No notes received. But, still. He rattles in his box. The big U. That's the key. A horror show symbol. A long day, but I feel fine. It's late but not too late. The sun is going down. Big spidery shadows spread across the decking outside, so I come inside, not wanting to be touched by big reedish digits. Pulling the big cover over the spearing contraption, leaves everywhere. Weather's turning. The fire has burned low, so I park. This is the best part of the day. Just zoning out, staring into the fire. Imagining. Gray and fuzzy embers, baubles of soft red fading to orange. I relax before hitting the books. I am, as it happens, turning day into night, staying up late as the lamps allow, and as much as my aching limbs in the mid-morning can charge the passive-aggressive house's batteries. It's a tough gig. I sit there, perched on the old chair. Staring, my mind wanders, and now and then it's not a dying fire but some far-off dying planetscape, maybe in the distant past or the distant future. Who knows? It's a spacer in the routine. My way of hitting the escape button. Red embers rusting, red embers rusting. A slow burning funeral. Outside a bird hoots. Up too late. Distant cracking of branches and limbs. Tension in the timber. So what? I've taken to keeping my own jotter. As I rake through Cribbage's archive, it makes sense I record my research, noting pages of interest and in which book I find them, but also I've been writing the day's events. Practicing a kind of empty mindlessness as this autumn swings slowly into winter and my days stuck here slowly fade. Nothing happened today apart from that nutjob cosplay cunt. Now that was fucking silly. He was lucky I didn't spear the cunt to death, but the harpoon contraption was miles back. Perhaps I'd ranged too far, maybe lesson learned. Stick to the boundaries, Min. Stay safe. This is the obvious way of rounding it all off. Remote viewing of files from a far-flung star. Conspiracy caperage, e.g. that's where the knowledge came from to build the pyramids. Also see how Di Darren sat on it at the Grouse Inn in the Cabric. It explains how wreckage was discovered, or rediscovered as it was old knowledge. An enlightenment. Also see the technology behind Skitten Downhill, aspects of the big use at Union Square and the recovery by the Wood Group of the ancient spear of Bobby the Golic Smasher, and of course Blastcap's hydro contraption and tapeless recording setup. The end, and of course, the jam jar shield dissipates in the spring. But Cribbage does not come back. I open the box, and the bones are gone. Not even a trace. No residue, no dust. It's like he'd never existed. I report it and I end up getting short shrift, sent on sick leave. I end up selling my flat. Using the cabin. Nay, council tax or anything. Magic. Just commute to work with a really fancy car I bought with all the money I'm saving. I get on with life. Standing at the cabin one glorious autumnal morning, on a weekend, my knuckles cracked, and flecks of skin hail down. Oh, I see now, it's like that then. I put down my cup of tea, and wander inside to open a bottle of wreckage, otherwise I'd be in bits by the end of the day. Might try adding a bit of soda water to it though, it's a bit bland.